we hyped this match, and unfortunately, I think it disappointed a little bit. Bayern Munich smash Eintracht Frankfurt 4-0. Um, if there was any doubts about this Bundesliga title, and I know there's Bayern fans in our Substack that hate every time I say that this title is wrapped up, they are all looking at the schedule and said, well, we could drop points here, we could top points there. I mean, come on. Now that you beat Eintracht Frankfurt, you got to admit the title is wrapped up, right? Like, come on, guys, it's done. Where are you gonna drop 8 points from here on? But no, I think the one thing that I thought was really interesting about this game. So here's the goal scorers: Michael Olise, Ito, Jamal Musiala, Serge Gnabry. No Harry Kane in the starting lineup. This was an attack that was anchored around Thomas Müller, who, he did look slow at times, but was he slower than Harry Kane in the last few weeks? Probably not. I thought they were very creative in the attack. It almost felt like they were freed of the shackles of having someone in the middle there that they had to anchor their every attacking move through. Um, this was an outstanding attacking performance by Bayern Munich against a very good team. And we have to also remember, I think for the first 45 minutes, there were chances there for Eintracht Frankfurt to get something going. And maybe this all plays out a little bit different if they're a little bit more aggressive, if they're a bit more progressive, if they're a bit more efficient. They weren't. Bayern Munich win this game 4-0. I thought they were excellent. This was an excellent performance, and it was an excellent performance by players that kind of have been hiding behind the Harry Kane shadow a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's probably one of the best performances I've seen from Leipzig from Bayern so far this season. Because it was in a big game, it was against a good team, and they completely played them off the pitch. I know we obviously saw them do very well against Leverkusen at the Allianz Arena, but they were unfortunate to only pick up 1 point in that game. But it felt to me like a game where Bayern were forced to confront the absence of their key players. You mentioned Harry Kane up front. Joshua Kimmich went off just before half-time, and then, of course, Upamecano didn't start through injury with Eric Dyer playing there, and Alphonso Davies even, actually, as well, who didn't start the game at left-back. Ito did. And it reminds me of that old quote from Plato, necessity is the mother of invention, and it felt to me like Bayern just kind of reworked their entire system without Kane up front. And yeah, Muller's obviously getting on in years, and he probably struggles to finish 90 minutes, but I thought the first half he was everywhere. He was a perfect foil for Musiala, Sané, and Olise to kind of run past him, make runs. At one point, actually, he picked up the ball and he was running, and Konrad Laimer was kind of running alongside him, then stopped to try and almost take a touch. And Müller just decided to hit a shot at the edge of the box. He hits a shot, it goes straight to Kevin Trapp, and he turns and he screams at Konrad Laimer, saying, "Why the hell aren't you making that run for me to play it into you?" And, we joke about Radio Müller and how he's always this loud player and how he's always this kind of like jovial character off the pitch. And he's always the first person that Bayern go to for like PR stuff or commercials or interviews and stuff. And he's always joking the mix on. But I thought that moment was a really interesting insight into what he's like as a player. His demands and his expectations and his standards are really second to none. And I thought even just that little moment there was so different from having Harry Kane up front, who's almost a bit of a wallflower when he's on the pitch. He's quiet, he's polite, never really shouts. He's always very cordial. And, he's actually quite accommodating of the players around him to a fault where, in that Leverkusen game, we saw him dropping deep. He was almost playing as a central midfielder at times and then you could contrast that with Thomas Müller screaming at his teammates to make the runs that he needs to make with him up front. And, even though I thought Frankfurt started quite well, Hugo Gitiki had a good shot in the first 5 or 10 minutes, Bayern just completely took control of this match and they completely constricted the life out of it. And I think that was down to the fact that they had a front line that were far more mobile, far harder to read. And you obviously saw guys like Musiala, Sané and Olise kind of really stepping up in Kane's absence. And, Müller just making space for them. That's his key job on the pitch. He exploits space. He pulls defenders out of place. And it felt like over and over and over again, Bayern had a kind of 4v3 situation on the edge of the Frankfurt box where there was always an extra man waiting for that layoff. And that's something we haven't really seen a lot of at Bayern Munich so far this season. So, I made a comment at full time saying this is the highest XG that Bayern have racked up in the Bundesliga this season. I know Harry Kane came on the second half of the second, halfway through the second half, shall I say. So he technically maybe contributed something to it. He obviously had a shot, at least one shot on target. But I don't think it's a coincidence that Bayern looked so good going up front without Harry Kane in that team. I know some people saying maybe also Kimmich missing out. I don't really care that as much because I didn't think he was particularly bad until leading up to his substitution. So I don't want to really include Kimmich in this, but it felt to me like, and I was very tempted to write a newsletter on this week, but then I thought if I write one more article complaining about Harry Kane, his agent and brother will be at my door eventually, kicking it in, saying, "What's my problem?" But it felt to me like watching that game, I was like, if I was Vincent Kompany or, the president or whoever else, Max Eberl, watching at the stands, I'd be thinking, this is the system that we need next season. We need a player like Thomas Müller. I know that's easier said than done, but we need a kind of false nine kind of player like that who can get the best out of Sane, Musiala, and Mike Olise, because I thought they just looked tremendous.
Young Thomas Müller, you say? I'm almost like Jamal Musiala isn't on the pitch. I mean,
do you know what though? Like Müller wasn't playing like classic Müller in this game, was he? He wasn't playing as a number 10. He was playing as a false 9, I guess. But I know I take your point.
But it's a good point too, because I don't think Thomas Müller can play like Thomas Müller anymore. And there was lots of talk after the game, going through the reactions where he was asked by Florian Plettenberg whether he's going to continue on Sky, right? And Thomas Müller said jokingly, well, how am I supposed to know if you don't know, right? But then he did say also, he didn't really deny rumors of him maybe calling it quits after this year. And that is a loss in some ways. I don't think Thomas Müller is the player that he once was. He doesn't have the legs to be Thomas Müller anymore. And, this is not me making a slide against Thomas Müller. He'll be the first one to admit that I'm right. I've been plenty times in the mixed zone, and I've been in the mixed zone where Thomas Müller has come through and had to go straight upstairs to the treatment room because, his body's aching. And again, he's the first one to admit this. And so I just don't think he has the freshness anymore to play the game that made him the player he is. And so, they pressed him to play as a number 9, and he fulfilled that role, and he fulfilled it in the way he could, and he did an excellent job at it. But it's also, part of the limitations that he now faces in this part of his career, that he was able to play this role. So yeah, you're quite right. What they do need is a number 9 that can play like that. Maybe a bit of a higher level. Yeah, I would have said maybe someone even like Omar Mamouche, who's now at Man City and doing quite well there, right? That would have been the sort of player. But you need to find that guy. You need to find and to develop him, because if Eintracht Frankfurt find him first and play him in the Bundesliga and he scores 10 to 15 goals, he's an 18 million euro player. That's just the reality of where we're in right now, right? You need to find this guy in Nuremberg. You need to find this guy in Greuther Fürth. Heck, you need to find this guy maybe in your own academy. That's where you need to find this guy. And that's actually, by the way, where you found Thomas Müller as well. It's not like Bayern Munich bought Thomas Müller. They found him in the academy.
Yeah, well, Louis van Gaal found him in the academy. I think the rest of the club are probably ignoring him at that point. But
that's because Louis van Gaal was the best thing that ever happened to Bayern Munich. And this is a hill I'm going to die on.
I'm not going to disagree with you. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's very, like I said, it's easier said than done finding a player like that. And as you said, Marmouche was a player who came from nowhere. Frankfurt fished him out of the, was it the Stuttgart reserves or Wolfsburg reserves? I can't remember, but I think it was Stuttgart he was at. And no, was it Wolfsburg? Wolfsburg, I think.
Came from Wolfsburg, yeah.
Yeah. He was on loan at one and on a contract at the other. And Bayern aren't really in the market of kind of swooping in for kind of bargain deals and hoping they work out and giving them game time until they do work out. So I understand it's very tricky for them. And, it's also worth saying that Harry Kane is still a very, very good player. There's no doubt about that. He scores goals at a ridiculous rate. And there will be people listening to this and undoubtedly in the corresponding YouTube video saying, you guys are nuts. He scored 21 goals this season. What the hell are you talking about? But a lot of that is penalties, and a lot of that is in spite of the fact that he doesn't quite work into the system in these big games. And it's maybe just something for Bayern Munich to consider. Maybe they don't have to sell Harry Kane. Maybe they just have to sign a second striker who can play the kind of role that Thomas Müller played today. Because let's be honest, Matthias Tell couldn't have played that role. That's not the kind of role Matthias Tell could play either. So it's not even like it was necessary because he left the club. It's just a role that, not so much about whether it's better than Harry Kane's role. It's just a role that gets the best out of Musiala, Michael Olise, and Leroy Sané, and that's the key thing, I think. A special shout out for Sané as well. I said before the game, I thought he'd be important because he started playing well, and sure enough, he did well. He could have probably scored 2 or 3 goals right enough, but he also gets his assist and does well there. So, it was just a really fascinating game for Bayern, and in a sense, the fact that we haven't even spoke about how bad Frankfurt were, I think underlines that point, because this was an absolutely atrocious performance from Frankfurt. And
yeah.
I know you said in the previous show that it's obviously a fixture which they don't win very often, but I just couldn't believe how bad they were.
They're always bad at the Allianz. They're always great against Bayern in Frankfurt. They've beaten them in recent years twice by 5 goals. Then there was the return fixture where they were this spectacular 3-3. For some odd reason, whatever they're doing, it doesn't work in Munich. And every year I think, wow, Frankfurt, they're so fantastic. This is a great team. They do such a great job. This year they're going to win in Munich. And every year, a result like this happens. And it's, Stuttgart actually is a similar story, right? Last year they lost to Munich pretty heavily, and then they beat them in Stuttgart. Sometimes these teams, the moment Bayern Munich come to their stadium, the belief is different. Maybe it's just also the crowd fires them on. But yeah, like something about the Allianz Arena makes these teams shit them every single time. And I kind of had this motion already in my head that this is probably not going to end well for Frankfurt again, because, it just doesn't quite work for them. There's very few teams that come to Munich, though, and just really take it to Bayern. Just trying to think top of my head. Like, one team that always actually does well in Munich is Leipzig. They don't seem to care. I've been to Gladbach. Yeah, it's another. Maybe one day we have to look at what they actually do when they come to the Allianz Arena and what they do different from these other top teams, because something that goes wrong when these clubs play, because it's not like the field is different or the teams are different. It's just a really odd thing. And Stuttgart is playing Bayern Munich next. They got smashed at the Allianz Arena, and I think it's going to be a completely different game in Stuttgart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just felt like another kind of typical. I felt like you after the Leverkusen game, and you were just really lamenting the way that Leverkusen kind of let this one slip. And I don't know, it felt like a match in which Frankfurt, I thought, set up quite well, and then it almost felt like the occasion got to them, and they were making silly mistakes. Sebastian Larsson, I thought in particular, was just, I keep calling Sebastian Larsson's name, Sebastian Larsson, Hugo Larsson, in the middle of the pitch was just horrendous. He kept giving the ball away. And then, of course, like Kevin Trapp, of all people, misses a cross.
Yeah.
Leads to the second goal. And it's just stuff like that where you're like, yeah, this isn't tactics. This isn't really, a lack of player quality. This is just individuals and personalities, struggling in the limelight. And that's often what happens at the Allianz Arena. I think it's like, it feels to me from covering German football, almost like a cultural thing where people are just petrified of playing. They're petrified of playing Bayern Munich, the logo or the badge, than the actual players at times. They're like, oh my God, it's Bayern.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way we can win this game. Even though on paper, I thought Frankfurt had an excellent opportunity to do so, because Bayern Munich were missing their best edge defender, their best central midfielder left at half-time, and their €95 million striker was on the bench. And Alphonso Davies, I keep forgetting him, one of the best players for Bayern this season, was on the bench as well. So Frankfurt couldn't have had a better opportunity to win this game, and they completely blew it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a bit harsh to expect Frankfurt to obviously win games at Allianz Arena. I totally get that, but the manner in which they capitulated was just really, really disappointing. Well, I guess they'll have to just pick themselves up and get on with it. But that was from a neutral's point of view, I was really disappointed in that.
Yeah, you know what I'm gonna do on my next few Germany trips when I go to other big teams, I'm gonna ask every single time now why teams falter at the Allianz Arena, and I'm gonna put it together as an article. This is gonna be my long-term project. I'm gonna get to the core of this. I'm now fascinated.